Welcome to Talkless Water, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the world of water with those making waves. My name is Todd Bottler, and I'm your host for Talkless Water. I'm also the editor-in-chief of Texas Plus Water and the Texas Water Journal. You can sign up for Texas Plus Water by visiting texaspluswater.org, and you can sign up for the Texas Water Journal at texaswaterjournal.org. Both publications are free. My guest today is Scott Wright, Principal Engineer for the River Design Group in Corvallis, Oregon. Scott grew up in Southern Oregon on the Rogue River, which was made famous by author Zane Grey. Scott's dad was a logger, and he helped instill a love for the natural environment through endless days of fishing, hunting, and time outdoors with Scott. It was during Scott's childhood that he witnessed a favorite fishing area on the Applegate River become inundated in a reservoir when the Applegate Dam was built by the Corps of Engineers. He later watched the Elk Creek Dam get partially built and then halted by environmental lawsuits. These childhood experiences and engineering degrees from Oregon State University became catalysts to bring about a lasting legacy to restore rivers for future generations to enjoy. Over the last 15 years, Scott has been the project manager and engineer of record for removing 4 dams on the Rogue River, including Gold Hill Dam, Gold Ray Dam, Wimer Dam, and Fielder Dam. Scott has over 31 years of engineering and construction expertise that combine to provide unique insights into river restoration and sound solutions for complex environmental problems. Not only is Scott a professional engineer, but he's also a project management professional and board-certified water resources engineer. Scott, welcome and thank you for being part of Talkless Water.
Great. Thanks, Todd. It's great to be here today.
So I always start out with my guest's background in water. And so I mentioned some of it, your time growing up with your father. And so when, during that period, did you kind of start thinking, hey, water might be a future career for me? When did that happen?
Yeah, so my whole life has been shaped, with water. And growing up in the Rogue Basin, Southern Oregon area, we were always on the water, whether it was the Rogue River, the Illinois River. We did a lot of fishing on there, and the Applegate River. And so my memories of growing up were always on the river. A lot of winter days chasing steelhead with my dad and also my grandpa. And I can remember being so cold and my feet being numb and my hands being numb all the time. But, we always were rewarded with a big fish, it seemed like. And the winter steelhead were just amazing creatures to come into contact with. So that really kind of brought a lot of fulfillment for me as far as being out on the rivers. And then, when I went to college, looking at a career, I liked engineering and civil engineering and water resources engineering seemed to be something that kind of could combine those things that I like doing outdoors. And so then I naturally just advanced into doing water resources engineering for my career. And so I've spent pretty much my whole career on the rivers and raising my family, doing rafting trips, fishing, various things like that. And then with the river restoration, I get to spend a lot of my days out in the field working with people and working on these great projects. The other thing too now is as far as after over 30 years of working in the career field of water resources, I'm also on the faculty at Oregon State University in the ecological engineering department, where I teach water resources engineering for classes there as well. So it's been very rewarding to start to transition into that part of my career, kind of give back to the younger generations to help them learn about rivers as well.
Oh, that's great. I just taught water policy at Texas State University in the geography department this last fall. But I've got connections, as I think I've mentioned to you, with Oregon State there in I think it's in the geography department with Aaron Wolf and Todd Jarvis and
Yep.
Greg Walker.
Yep.
But, just thinking about what you were saying about, fishing for steelhead when you're young, there's so many people who do, work in the natural resources field and with water who have a similar, experience growing up as what you described. And, for me, that was my dad taking us goose hunting in the rice fields west of Houston and the Katy Prairie along the Colorado River. And, take my brother and I can remember, just freezing to death. And, that was the days when, you'd have electric socks with a big giant battery. You had to put the battery in your waders with, everything else. But, those are just, memories that are, some of my most cherished. And it sounds like it's the same for you. I'm curious, are you still able to fish for steelhead on the Rogue River?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was just there this week and was able to see some steelhead down there that other people had caught. But yeah, there's definitely the Rogue River is a really special fishery, and there's always a big fish in there, whether it's a winter steelhead or a chinook in the fall or a summer steelhead. There's always a big fish that you can catch, and so it really is a pretty unique river in that sense.
So we're going to get back to this subject. When we talk about your work with dams, I want to also make sure that, we talk a little bit about what you see after the dam removal in terms of not only anadromous fish like salmon, but other aquatic species that are impacted. So as I mentioned in your bio, you're a board certified water resources engineer. So what does that mean? Board certified?
Yep. So the American Society of Civil Engineers, they've started to create actually higher certifications that people can go after that shows expertise in a certain or a specific area. And so this highest distinction comes after you become a professional engineer, which you have to have 10 years of experience, plus you have to have a master's degree or higher. And then you also have to have mastered the body of knowledge within your specialty area of expertise. So it's a pretty specific thing for me in the sense of water resources engineering. And so you have to apply once you have that experience and expertise, and then the Board of Trustees has to confirm the board certification on you.
Well, that's kind of the what do they used to call it, the good housekeeping stamp of approval, or the kind of thing. So, that's great, and I imagine that it's particularly important, given really the sensitive kind of work you're doing. I mean, working on restoring rivers, everybody, even the public, is, I'm sure, keenly interested in those projects.
Yeah, it really is. And I'll tell you, maybe as we talk a little bit down the road here on this, just about all of the different aspects of dam removal that's so intriguing as far as bringing in everybody into the fold here and talking about having input on the process. So we'll get into that maybe a little bit later here.
Okay, so tell us about the River Design Group.
Yeah, we're a small boutique firm, I would say, kind of a niche market where we exclusively work in the river environment. So we have about 35 people, and we have an office here in Corvallis is where I'm at. And then we also have an office in Whitefish, Montana. And then we also have another one in Boise, Idaho. And so we're a very strong team where we, like I said, work exclusively in the rivers. So everybody essentially gets to do all parts of the projects too. So we're all out in the field doing field work. We're all helping in on the designs of these projects, helping out with permitting. And then we all participate in the construction side of things as well, making sure that these projects get implemented on the ground the way we had envisioned them and permitted them. So it's a pretty unique in today's world to have people that have that kind of knowledge base where what what I often refer to as from lust to dust, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So when we get in on the front end and talk about planning and alternatives, and then we get to a preferred alternative and then move that into, actually being implemented on the ground. And we get to see all parts of that. So that's kind of our unique aspect at River Design Group with that business size of us and our locations as well are really centrally located where there's a lot of great restoration happening. So we're pretty fortunate in that sense. And then we just celebrated 20 years of being in business. So that's pretty exciting that, and the other part of that is that many of our people, like our average employee has been here 10 years or more. And so we just have once people come here, they oftentimes stick and never leave. So it's a great company from that standpoint of just people are doing what they enjoy doing, and they're getting to kind of mix that work with things that they enjoy, where, being out on rivers, being in the field, nature, and then ultimately, I think one of the really cool things about our company is just being able to leave a lasting legacy, because everything we do is helping these rivers and the environment. And, when we drive around now, we can see major changes that we've had a pretty instrumental part in throughout the whole kind of Western United States. So there's pretty much every river we've worked on and or helped out. So it's exciting to be able to take a trip anywhere in Oregon for me, and I can identify projects that I've worked on throughout the whole state, and same thing in Idaho and Montana. And that's exciting and rewarding, from that perspective. So that's River Design Group, kind of a smaller boutique river restoration firm.
So our listeners, or if we have any dedicated listeners who've listened to all these podcasts, they might recall that I interviewed your principal hydrologist there in Whitefish, where I spent a lot of time, and heard about some of the projects that he was involved with, and I became really fascinated with the kind of work that you're doing, and so kind of thinking before we get into the details of your specific projects, just, I saw something the other day that said that, it was a graphic that had the number of dam removals in each state over the last 110 years. And I was thinking, okay, these are all going to be out west or something. And I was shocked that it had Pennsylvania with 350 dam removals. And then the next biggest number was maybe California with 186 or something. But I was thinking about that. Wow, Pennsylvania, boy, they had been after it. And so I'm curious, from what you see, is the current activity, is it pretty, evenly spread across the United States, or does it seem to mostly be along the East Coast or the West Coast, or where do you see most of the work now?
Yeah, it's actually what I see is it's mostly kind of on the coastlines, basically, where you have on the East Coast and on the West Coast, because in those cases, a lot of times you have anadromous species that are coming from the ocean up into the rivers. And so the dams become a bigger issue for them if they're trying to get back to places to spawn and or rear. And so the coasts seem to be kind of the biggest areas at this point. In the central regions, Midwest, there's definitely activity happening, but not quite as much, because many of those fish and aquatic species are more residential, where they live in one particular area. They don't have to go in and out to the ocean. So that makes a big difference, I think, in the funding tends to follow those anadromous species more than it follows kind of the residential or native species that are local, that don't move around as much. So definitely Oregon, Washington, California have been, I would say, leaders in a lot of those cases, because we do have a lot of wild salmon and steelhead moving in and out of our areas. But the other thing too that I would say it's very interesting when you start to compare East Coast versus the West Coast in something like dam removal, in that the East Coast has a lot more history than us. So the issues that they deal with are very different than the ones that we deal with on the West Coast. The East Coast has more historic and cultural type issues with, like the dam was part of the town seal. The whole
Right.
the whole town was built around the dam. It was kind of the central hub for the whole city, and so those become things that people identify with, and so those are really important aspects that you have to deal with on the East Coast more so than on the West Coast, where on the West Coast we have some different issues. With like tribal requirements and tribal interests that that are a little bit different than on the East Coast, and then we have other things like sediment and other issues. So it's pretty interesting in talking to some of my counterparts on the East Coast, some of the things they deal with versus what we deal with on the West Coast. So I would say though that it's definitely on the sides of the United States and less so in the middle as far as the numbers.
So, in Texas, there haven't been very many removals. The ones that have occurred are mostly because the dams were in bad shape and they're relatively small dams. Some were dams that were built illegally. No one had a permit, but they put a dam across the river. But about 25 years ago, my first assignment when I went to work for River Authority in Central Texas was to try to work with folks who were trying to decide whether to remove a small dam in the city of San Marcos called Capes Dam. And the folks I was trying to work with were the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who were on opposite sides on whether the dam should be removed. And that was a case where there were endangered species, but one of the concerns was that the dam was really the only thing kind of protecting one of the last stands of Texas wild rice. Mm-hmm. And so I was spectacularly unsuccessful in that attempt to get people to work together, even though I thought I had an agreement when the meeting was over. But then, I found out later that, no, I didn't. But I'm, looking at, of course, the dam removal projects that are really in the news now, the Klamath River. It's those are pretty big dams. They're not huge, but I'm guessing that most of the dams that are being removed are relatively small dams, ones that you're probably talking about that were for a mill or something in the East Coast. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's actually quite a few different databases that you can access. So if you wanted to get the actual numbers for the dams being removed, and where they're at as well, there's a lot of really good references out there. The American Rivers, they have a website that you can go to, and they have a pretty good database. The USGS has a dam removal information portal, DRIP. So if you search that, that's a good one to look at as well. And then the Army Corps of Engineers has the National Inventory of Dams. So there's actually quite a few places you can go to actually find the numbers on exactly like in your state and even your county. You can go get that information to find out. The one thing I will say, though, is that there's kind of the number that we see in databases and all that, but there really is a lot more that we don't even know that are out there, that are these smaller dams, like you said, that are small push-up dams or small dams that people have built over the years that just don't even go recognized on any databases. So like in Oregon, for instance, we have around 900 dams that are recognized on most databases, but I think the number is probably a good 50% higher than that if you actually get out and look on the ground to see what's out there in more detail. So those numbers are low, what we know in the databases for sure. But as you said, that is true. I think for the most part, most dams that we're talking about, there are a lot like the 15 feet and smaller as far as the height of them. But boy, the impacts can be monumental on taking these things out to help with fish, because those smaller dams have, and many times just the biggest impact is something like the Klamath dams. And so it's a pretty significant amount of area that you can open up if something didn't have a fish ladder or fish passage by it, by taking out some of these small dams. And what we've seen kind of in our work is that, you can take out, like in the time that I've worked on the Klamath Dam since 2009. And in that time, I've taken out over 20 dams, I think. And so we're waiting on 4 dams on the Klamath, right? So in that time span, we've taken out a lot of other dams that have pretty significant impacts as well. So those big ones are cool. They're great for publicity, and that was a monumental task to get to the point where they're coming out right now as we speak. But there are so many others out there that can have just as big of impact, that we have to also take care of those at the same time.
So let's kind of dive a little bit deeper into some of those projects you've been involved with. Tell us, what is involved, and the kind of the whole process in removing one of those dams.
Yeah, so dam removal is I've been doing engineering for over 30 years, and dam removal is unlike any other type of project. I'll say that for sure. It combines so many aspects of human interaction, and it requires extensive use of emotional intelligence to empathize and to communicate with others and to be a really good listener. It's social intelligence to be able to navigate the cultural dynamics. I mean, people identify with these dams that are in place. Right. Many times, as we've all experienced, I'm sure, is that you grow up and it's a fixture. It's something that's there that you're aware of. And then all of a sudden, if somebody wants to change that, it's a pretty big impact in people mentally for that. They have good memories associated with it. I have memories of all the dams on the Rogue River that I've taken out. I learned to water ski behind the Savage Rapids Dam. I used to go with my dad and grandpa on the Gold Ray Dam reservoir and hunt frogs, at night. And so I have memories of all of them. And yet at the same time, for me, it was special to take them out. But for others that have memories there, it was not. It was kind of the opposite, because they remember having a good time with their grandfather, fishing near the dam, and for us to take it out was wrong. So everybody has kind of a different perspective, but so the social intelligence to be able to navigate through this is really important. And of course, the river engineering knowledge, that's a specialized area in and of itself. So that's pretty significant as well. And then finally, and this is something that people don't think about very often, but there's a spiritual sensitivity as well that has to take place when you start talking about these dams. I was just on last week. I was up in Washington on the Puyallup River and working with the Puyallup tribe, who had filed a lawsuit against a hydropower company there, and has been fighting for years and years to try and get fish passage in the Puyallup River in this particular area. And they finally won the lawsuit. And so it was basically bringing tears to eyes for them to actually win this and have the first time in over 100 years that the Puyallup will have, this dam out of there and fish passage up through their volitional fish passage. So for tribes especially, it really is significant spiritually. And then, I was just down yesterday at another dam in Southern Oregon, and it was kind of the other side of the spectrum where they're like, we don't want this dam out over our dead bodies. It was totally the opposite. And so I see that all the time. People identify with the dams, and for some of them, they identify as you attacking them if you do something to it. And then others are like, yeah, get it out. So it's really a very interesting dynamic that is, everyone is different. Every time it's different. And so having the ability to navigate kind of that large background and spectrum of people is makes it really interesting from my perspective. The technical side, like the dam removals, like even on the Klamath dams, technically it's not difficult in the sense that, you know, the river worked just fine before, and then the dam went in, and so all you're trying to do is get that concrete or the material out of there so that it can go back to, you know, being a river like it was before. And so that part of it oftentimes isn't real difficult. It's the human component in dealing with that's oftentimes the most difficult part of the projects.
So, you know, just thinking about how the water community, at least my experience here in Texas, you know, thinks about dams, and I'm really talking about river authorities and others, water managers. You know, there is definitely that emotion related to dams. I think some of it is maybe, you know, when it comes to dam removal, there's somewhat of a fear that, you know, hey, this small dam comes out. If this small dam comes out, the next thing is they're going to want to take out this big, you know, flood control dam or water supply dam. But I mean, I don't look at it that way. I haven't seen much of that. And you know, the way I try to think about it is dams are tools, and, you know, they have pluses and minuses, and they also have, you know, times when they're useful and then no longer useful. You know, they're built for specific purposes, and, you know, those purposes may not be, you know, might not be being fulfilled anymore, or they might not be really needed. And so that's the time for people to take a look and decide, you know, hey, is there more benefit from removing this dam? So
I would say that's 100% correct. And, you know, there are some dams like the ones that we deal with, primarily, most of them have reached their useful lifespan. They are, a lot of them aren't doing anything. In the case of like the Gold Ray Dam on the Rogue River, it was a 360 foot wide dam, 38 feet high, that was serving no purpose at all. It hadn't generated power in over 40 years, and it was just basically sitting there. But oftentimes when these counties or other people inherit these dams from the hydropower company, they don't have money to go in and take them out. And so it becomes just kind of a nuisance for them. And so in this case here, you know, the county was able to get money through the American Reinvestment and Recoveries Act. And it was like, yeah, we want this liability out of here. And so that funding went to it and made it possible to take that dam out for the county, which was really happy about that. However, neighbors weren't necessarily, you know, in the same mindset as far as they like that dam. So there was definitely controversy over that one as well, even though it was serving no purpose, you know, for diverting water or creating hydropower or anything like that. People still wanted to keep it.
Right. Yeah, I've definitely seen that where, you know, somebody now is kind of the owner of a dam that didn't build it, and the dam's not in good shape. And so it costs a lot of money to get the dam in good shape. And so the question then becomes, well, you know, who's going to pay for that? And if there isn't anybody to pay for that, does it make more sense to remove it, which is not cheap either, but there might be ways to get funding for part of that, or maybe most of it in some cases, depending on the specific dam. And so I think that's, you know, that's probably a pretty common scenario. And boy, you know, just thinking about the age of many of these dams, it's just something that's going to be happening more and more often, especially in these small dams. So and you're correct. That is the common scenario now that we end up dealing with, where the dams don't serve a lot of purpose. The owner doesn't have any money to deal with them. And there is funding, whether it's from, you know, U.S. Fish and Wildlife or American Rivers or other places that
that can provide funding to remove the dam, because it gets back to kind of what we view as being important, and river health we realize is important. And so if we can take a dam out and improve river health, a lot of funding tends to follow that now, and so it's been a good thing over the last couple decades here. So
right. Well, just one kind of famous case made famous by CNN. The river authority I worked for had a dam that the gate collapsed, and that was caught on video and was seen all over the world many times. And in that case, I think that dam was either built in the late 20s or early 30s. It was a small hydroelectric dam, and was not producing enough hydropower to make it profitable. And but after it was built, many decades after it was built, people built houses around the dam, and so they were very expensive houses, very expensive real estate, and so the whole issue of what would happen to the dam was really a function of that, as opposed to its original purpose of producing hydroelectric power. And so that dam, I think is almost complete. They're replacing it. And it's kind of an unusual scenario in some ways, because it's not what the dam was originally built for, but it serves a very different purpose that has got a significant constituency who's got the pull to get a new dam put in there. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's actually interestingly, that's as you say that, it reminds me of several projects that we have here in Oregon, even in the West Coast, that same situation, where they become part of the landscape, basically, these dams, and they may not be serving any purpose from a standpoint of hydropower or irrigation diversion or anything, but they become part of the landscape for people that are living around them. And so it becomes very difficult to remove the dam, because now, like I said, they become very entrenched in the landscape and in identity of the community.
So, as you mentioned, removing the structure is not all that complicated. You're blowing it up and then breaking it up, and you're doing things like that. But you do have, I guess you have to reroute the river, temporarily in many of those cases, and then once you get the structure removed, you've got a lot of sediment behind it, and so. I'm curious, about that as well. Do you end up removing the sediment, or you just wait for the next big flood for it to get distributed downstream, or is it a combination of the both? How's that handled?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't want to downplay the fact that technically there are a lot of aspects that are difficult. So I don't want to downplay that. I'm just that we can usually solve those issues. Because we know enough about rivers. We have an understanding of hydraulic engineering and water resources and the different aspects that go into solving those problems. And those are things that we can typically deal with pretty readily. It's the social aspects, the permitting, all those things tend to be the more difficult, I think, to deal with, because it brings in a lot of other people, so to speak, into the process. But that's a good point about the sediment, because that's always a question. It's a huge question on even like on the Klamath dams, because that's a really unique system that has totally different sediment than most places. It's basically a bunch of blue-green algae that's deposited at the bottom of the reservoirs for the last, 50, 60, 70 years. And that's the sediment that's in there. So it's an organic material, which is really unique. And we don't normally have something like that in these. But what we typically try to do, and we work with the fisheries agencies and regulatory community, but the preferred option for these projects is to allow the sediment to naturally go downstream. And the sediment is natural to the river already, so to let it go downstream is a natural process as well. It just happens to be a big amount oftentimes. But we found that like on the Marmot Dam on the Sandy River here in Oregon, that was a huge amount of sediment, big slug of sediment, but it went through the system without causing too many issues. Even on when you look at the LWAP in Washington, that sediment was allowed to go down the system as well. It did cause some initial issues with the water intake facilities downstream, but they were able to mitigate that and move on. And so anytime we can, it is the preference to just allow that sediment to stay in the river and naturally go downstream. There are cases where if there's contaminated sediment, a good example is the Milltown
just
Dam.
about to ask you that.
Yeah. The example on the Milltown Dam in Montana, there at the confluence there, the Clark Fork and the Blackfoot River there, they had contaminated basically a Superfund site. So with that one, what happened was we actually hauled a lot of that material out. They actually built a rail spur into the site and loaded the rail cars, and basically every day a full load of rail cars went out of that area and with sediment that was contaminated and being put into a repository outside of the river corridor. So there are cases when it is required to remove the material, but we have a standard here in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, where it's called the sediment evaluation framework. So it's a systematic way of going about looking at the sediment that's stored in the reservoirs and checking it for contamination, chemicals of concern. And then if nothing is found in that effort and that study, then typically it's allowed to let the sediment go downstream. If there are contaminants, then we go an alternate route and oftentimes take them out. So what I found is it's pretty rare that we have contaminants that are of concern. And for the most part, we have pretty high energy gravel bed rivers on the West Coast. So there's the contaminants don't stay in those areas. They tend to go into the silt and finer materials, clays, and in lower energy environments, that's where the contaminants tend to collect. So in most cases, we're allowed to just let the sediment naturally go downstream.
So looking at, the removal projects you've been involved with, what do you see in terms of the results in terms of the ecology of those streams where the dams were removed? How quickly do you see recovery of key species and some of the other important ecological values of those river segments?
So the rivers tend to be extremely robust, and surprisingly so. And there's actually there's been some studies done. Desiree Tolos at Oregon State University, on the faculty there in the department I'm in, she's done some studies where looked at kind of before and after, and the resilience of these rivers is pretty darn amazing. And you start to see the biota come back immediately after dam removal. We saw, like on the Gold Hill and also on the Gold Ray dam removal projects, where the dams came out in the summer, August, September time period, and we saw fish spawning in the reservoir, what was previously the reservoir areas, within a month, where they had moved in and started using the grapples that were exposed in the prior reservoir area. And so we have seen from all the work that we've done and been associated with just immediate results and immediate recovery of the ecosystem. And so you don't have to kickstart it or do anything. It's pretty resilient. And we just really, the thing that I always say is you just got to get the dam out of the way, and everything else tends to take care of itself. The sediment will distribute out and go downstream, and the species, whether it's the aquatic species or even the vegetation, tends to come back pretty quickly and reestablish itself at those new levels. Oftentimes the seed bed is already there of the plants that were in the system. And so we do oftentimes follow up with restoration, but it's not necessarily immediately when the dam comes out. It might be year 2 or 3 that we come back in and try to do the restoration after the river sorts itself out a little bit. Then you can come in and do effective restoration by oftentimes revegetation. Sometimes like on the West Coast here, a lot of times we're putting in large wood and creating habitat function through that. And then, just other aspects to help with the reestablishment of native species, primarily in these areas. So it's always surprising, but it is a pretty fast recovery. And the cool thing about for my position here is that I get to see these projects all the time. So projects we did in 2007, like the Gold Hill Dam removal, in 2010, the Gold Ray Dam removal, and then others around the state and West Coast, we get to see them all the time because we're doing other projects nearby. And so, we've like in the case of the Gold Hill project, been watching that for over 15 years, and seeing how it's recovering and responding. And, we learn from that and able to apply those lessons learned to future projects that we're working on. The other thing, too, that we're really getting a good momentum in the area here is that when people see those projects 5 or 10 years down, they know what they look like, and they know that, oh, okay, this dam removal stuff can happen and things can recover and it's okay, and so that's really important for people to be able to see real results right there in their communities. So that's been a big benefit from the work that we've done here in Oregon.
So I was going to ask you about that, how public attitudes change after the dam removal. Folks who might have been concerned about being removed. Sounds like, once the project's done and a few years have passed, that, attitudes that were of concern might be diminished because people have a chance to go out there and see what it looks like or spend time on the river or whatever they're doing.
Yeah, there's for sure. So it's kind of interesting because you have to break it out into different people groups, kind of. And there's the people that live or were right at the dam kind of site in the reservoir area. Their memories are not very short. They have longer memories. So if you ask them 5 years out, they'll tell you oftentimes they'll be pretty upset about the project, because they lost something in it. However, the people away from, that area, almost unanimously are like, yeah, it's been great. And so, again, an example there on the Rogue River where in 2010, the Gold Ray Dam came out. They did a review in 2012. Southern Oregon University did surveys of people, and they did kind of the 2010 survey and the 2012 to see what the effects were on them kind of economically and on a recreational level. And what they found is that, the river guides were really happy. They were like, all of them were I think the increase was like 84% were favorable on having more area to fish and more fish. And the same thing with the rafting guides. They were very happy with it too. And so it was almost across the board, everybody that was a user of the river was happy, and the economics increased for all of the people that were associated with the river like that. And so everything that I have seen for the most part is showing pretty positive results from river users after dams come out.
Well, I'm sure you've got some kind of time series documentation, photos before the removal, the during and after, and so many years after, so you can see, how those changes look over time. Yep. I bet that's pretty.
Well, I'll tell you one of the most interesting pictures that I have right now is there's a picture of Copco 1 reservoir, which is on the Klamath dams that's coming out right now as we speak. And I have I think it's like a 1904 picture. And then I was able to replicate that picture with the dam in place in the reservoir, so you can see like a mile plus over the reservoir. And so I'm really excited to get back and be able to take a picture of it now once the dam is gone, and have those three photos that you can easily stack side by side and see kind of before, during, and after, with the dam there. And I've got that. I try to do that with a lot of the projects. I've got the same thing on, like the Gold Ray Dam on the Rogue River, kind of an early 1900s picture before, and then the after. So it's pretty neat to see that history, and just to see how, taking the dams out, how quickly the river goes back to what it used to look like, and or just is pretty resilient and robust, and gets back to a operating river.
So just kind of thinking about the dam removal movement, I guess you'd call it, here in the United States, and what I've seen in other places. I gave a talk at a conference in China several years ago, and the talks at that conference, there were speakers from China, but there were also speakers from India and Bangladesh, and so the whole mindset towards dams very different, right? I mean, it's all about building dams, and how dams are really symbols of power, and are important geopolitically for those rivers in that part of the world where they're sharing, a river. Multiple countries are sharing a river, and so I'm just curious. You see signs that I guess the dam removal movement in the U.S. is spreading to other countries.
Yeah, for sure. I am seeing that. And, especially in the European countries, people are starting to realize, and things have really been picking up here in the United States when you start to look at, essentially is around the early 90s is when dam removal started to become something that people would consider. And, the numbers have just been continuing to go up and up. Here in the United States, and in other countries, like I said, primarily in the European areas, that are starting to pick up and learn from what some of the things that we're doing, and taking that on and moving forward. But I will say, just like you brought up there, is that dams were considered progress. And even when we were building them here in the United States, they were progress. That brought power, and it brought water diversions, that to arid lands and things like that. Even the Grand Coulee, what helped win a war for us, basically.
Right.
The power it generated. So they're symbolic, and their symbolism is progress, and a good thing for a lot of people. And I think it's just what has happened as we've kind of hit that, that crest where we're starting to see that, we also have to take care of the rivers too. And the rivers have an impact on everything else around us as well. So we, that movement had started in the 90s and has picked up momentum and continues. And that's why you're seeing something like the Klamath dams being taken out right now, is because of that momentum that's been established with, different projects like the Elwha and the Condit, and some of these big projects that you've seen coming out in the past decade or so. And so I see that continuing, for dams that are kind of, I don't want to say obsolete, but they're the amount of investment that's required. I mean, at the end of the day, it often comes down to a financial decision. And for Pacific Core and the Klamath dams, it wasn't financially viable to invest the amount of money they had to bring them up to current conditions. And that's the current criteria for fish passage and water quality and things like that. And that's what you're seeing in a lot of these, is that they had a FERC license for hydropower. Oftentimes those licenses used to be like 50 years or 30 years, long periods of time. And they're starting to come due in a lot of cases. And when they come due, they have to upgrade the dams to modern requirements for fish passage and, like I said, water quality standards, things like that. So, you're starting to see some of these hydropower facilities where it just doesn't make sense economically for them, the investment. And so they're just saying, we're fine with taking it out. And so that is just something that's changed in the recent kind of past 10 or 20 years, I think, that wasn't that way before.
Right. Well, we'll see what will happen on the Snake River. I think it'd be interesting to see how all that continues to unfold.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's something here in the Northwest that we hear about quite a bit, with the Columbia and the Snake River, the Columbia creating a lot of obviously hydropower, and then the Snake, and it's a corridor for commodities to be shipped back and forth, and so it's a pretty significant impact out here as far as to discuss with people, but definitely starting to build some momentum in that direction as well for removal.
So, Scott, let's go ahead and wrap up with our last question here. How can our listeners learn more about the River Design Group?
Well, probably the best way. River Design Group is a small engineering firm. You can look at our website. It's probably the best place to find out more about us. It has all of our people, our staff on there. It gives a lot of good examples of projects that we work on. And if you want to learn more about the ones that I've talked about here, whether it's the Rogue Basin, or we have other like the Deschutes Basin in Central Oregon. We have stuff in Montana and all over the place that you can look at. The Klamath, I think, Basin is on there as well. The Klamath River projects that we've worked on. And so River Design Group. Yeah, it is the best way to do that. So it's just one word, River Design Group. And you can use .com as well, and they both get you to the same place. But yeah, people can go there and they can, if anybody's interested, they can reach out to me as well. My email address is swright, so SWRIGHT @riverdesigngroup.net.
Great. Scott, thank you for joining us today. I really enjoyed discussing this topic. It's one that I'm really very interested in.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you, Todd. That's good. And it's an exciting time. And like I said, there's nothing like dam removals. It's brings in people. It brings in pretty much everything you can imagine for an engineer to have to deal with and work with. And for me, it's most rewarding and interesting problem that you could approach, as an engineer with all the different aspects that you have to deal with. So it's been an exciting opportunity for me over the years, and I look forward to working on many more. Great.
Well, if you can do something that you love every day as your work, it doesn't seem like work, does it? Not always. No. It does. Yeah, but not always.
Like I said, the people side of it is definitely challenging, and some days it's good, some days not so good, but it's definitely stimulating, which is what I like and enjoy about you never know what it's going to be like. And so I can remember going to one public meeting. This was for the Klamath Dams down. This was like about 10 years ago, but it was for the Klamath Dams, and we were meeting in Wairika. And when I showed up for the meeting going in, and when there were state police there with guns and everything else, I knew that, okay,
right,
this is definitely the real deal here. So there's been a lot of interesting times like that where, we've had police officers that have escorted us in and out of places, and that's what I mean by it's so unique and so different than pretty much any other type of work that engineers do. So it's pretty rewarding from that sense.
Right. I've been part of the management of some meetings like that where things were pretty heated, and you had to have law enforcement there. So hope you don't have too many more of those.
Yep.
Well, great. So thanks again. And for our listeners, this has been Talkless Water. And my guest today was Scott Wright, Principal Engineer for the River Design Group in Corvallis, Oregon. I want to thank you, the listener, for spending your valuable time listening to Talkless Water. And I want to thank Anna Huff at the Meadow Center for Water and the Environment at Texas State University for getting each episode ready to go. My name is Todd Bottler, and this has been Talkless Water. Let's talk water again soon.